everyone, and welcome to Tripping the Light VR. Thank you for coming this afternoon. We have three great talks lined up that cover a wide spectrum of things covering and things around the space of virtual reality. So a couple of things to note. There is a discrepancy between the order of the presentations in the printed booklets and what's been in the app and on the web, so we will be following what's been on the web. So the first talk will be the making of Welcome to Lightfields VR, and this will be presented by Ryan Overbeck and Paul DeBevic. Ryan has spent the last 6+ years at Google Incorporated, where he currently researches compression and real-time rendering for light fields, and previously helped to develop the core rendering and navigation engines in Google Earth for maps. Before that, Ryan received his PhD after studying under Professor Ravi Ramamurthy at Columbia University, where he focused on leveraging ray coherence for high-quality rendering. Paul DeBevic is a senior scientist at Google VR and an adjunct research professor at the USC Institute for Creative Technologies. Since his 1996 PhD at the UC Berkeley, DeBevic's publications and animations have focused on photogrammetry, image-based rendering, high dynamic range imaging, image-based lighting, reflectometry, facial animation, 3D displays, and VR. Paul received SIGGRAPH's first significant new researcher award in 2001 and a Scientific and Engineering Academy Award in 2010 for the light stage facial capture systems. He recently served as Vice President for ACM SIGGRAPH and co-chairs the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences SciTech Council.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm Ryan Overbeck from Google. I put together this presentation with Paul DeBevic, Daniel Erickson, and Daniel Evangelakos. And today I'm going to be talking about Welcome to Lightfields. It's a free app available for download on the Steam store. And this is really the first time that people can download panoramic light fields like these onto their own computer and view them in VR. And these clips might look like we took a video camera and walked through these scenes, but these are real renderings from our system. This is really what it looks like when you look at Welcome to Lightfields in VR. And Google and others have been looking into this sort of immersive photography for a long time now. The ability to take people to exotic places without having to pay for a plane ticket. And they've tried a bunch of different technologies to try to accomplish this. One technology is photogrammetry, where you take a bunch of pictures of a scene and use computer vision to generate a 3D textured model. And this is used in Google Earth VR. Valve has a great demo of this in the lab on Steam. And there are companies that focus just on photogrammetry, like capturing reality. Now, photogrammetry is really great because you can wander anywhere in the scene, you can view the model from any direction, but you generally lose view-dependent effects like reflections that just get plastered onto the geometry. And you can see that here in the Atomium in Belgium. This model is supposed to be reflective like a mirror. And complex geometry like trees are really hard to model. And so even the best photogrammetry models can look a little bit video gamey and aren't quite like being in that real-world place. Another approach is stereo panoramas, which you see here in the flight deck of the Space Shuttle Discovery. Google launched a couple products based on stereo panorama video with Google Jump and VR 180. Facebook launched Surround 360. And there are studios like Felix and Paul and Jaunt VR that also make stereo panorama video. Now, stereo panoramas tend to be more photorealistic than photogrammetry, but you're limited to a single viewpoint. You can only rotate your view. And also, as you look up and down, the imagery warps. And also, if you tilt your head, you lose the stereoscopic effect. And because of these things, people can sometimes feel a little bit uncomfortable or even a little sick when viewing stereo panoramas in VR. Now, light fields offer a whole nother level of realism. You get the full 6 degrees of freedom of movement, that's both rotation and translation, within a limited space. And you get this full freedom of movement while maintaining photorealism. And so static scenes like this come alive with dynamic effects like reflections that you can see in the monitors here, or transparency through the windows. Also, your movement in VR matches your movement in the real world, and so people tend to feel comfortable when viewing light fields in VR. Light fields really are like photographs that you can step inside of and move around. So we've been researching light fields for a while now, and we wanted to share our results with everybody. So we built a couple light field cameras. We captured a bunch of light fields. We wrote up this app, Welcome to Light Fields, with the help of Unity, and we launched it all to the Steam store. Now, I'm assuming some people here haven't seen the demo yet, so I wanted to show a couple clips of it here. And if you haven't seen it yet, please come visit us over at the Immersive Pavilion, where we're showing live demos. So Welcome to Light Fields includes a little guided tour that explains what light fields are and shows you around a few scenes. And then there's a gallery of 34 light fields that we've collected. And we worked really hard to collect a wide variety of scenes that show everything that light fields have to offer. So thanks to a really great collaboration with the Smithsonian, we were able to collect a bunch of light fields inside of the Space Shuttle Discovery at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. So you can see what it feels like to be inside of the Space Shuttle's cargo bay here. And our light fields are really great for getting a true sense of scale, so you can stand outside the space shuttle and really see just how big it is, or how confined it is in the flight deck. Now, I already pointed out the reflections in the monitor, but our light fields are also really good at getting really intricate geometry, so you get motion parallax even on the little switches and dials, especially on the ceiling here. We also worked closely with a 3D photographer, Greg Downing, who helped us collect a bunch of light fields all around California, and we collected several light fields in the Gamble House here. Now, the Gamble House has lots of this finished wood with these beautiful glossy reflections that show up really nicely in our light fields, and you can see the reflections in the vases here too. And this one is one of my personal favorites. The St. Stephen's Church in Granada Hills has this beautiful stained glass window, and as you move your head side to side in the light field, you can see the light just peeking through the little panes of stained glass. And I don't know of any other technology that can capture this kind of thing in real-world scenes the way light fields can. And we can capture people, too. And so we did a photo shoot with artists Sherry and Gonzalo here, who started tiling their bathroom one day and never stopped. They covered their entire home in Venice, California, with these little colorful and reflective pieces of tile. So light fields have been explored for a long time now. In academia, they were introduced to computer graphics way back in 1996 with two papers, Light Field Rendering by Lavoie and Hanrahan, and the LumiGraph by Stephen Gortler and others. More recently, Otoy showed a demo of light fields using early Oculus Rift development kits. And last year, Lytro showed off light field video in VR with a piece called Hallelujah, but it did require specialized hardware in order to display them. And none of these works really meets our goal of using fast and affordable camera rig to produce high-quality panoramic light field stills that you can view with consumer VR devices. And as you can see here, you can view Welcome to Light Fields on a commodity VR-ready laptop and view it in consumer 6DoF HMDs like HTC Vive, Oculus Rift, or Windows Mixed Reality headsets. So with that background out of the way, the rest of this talk, we're going to talk about how we acquire, process, and render our light fields. And to help talk about how we acquire them, I'm going to hand it over to Paul DeBevick here.
Great. Cool. Thank you very much, Ryan. So the basic thing that we're trying to capture is all of the rays of light that are coming into a sphere of space about this big, about as far as you can move your head from a standing position or from a seated position. And kind of an early concept of this was to put cameras basically on a spherical surface and just capture all those rays of light at the same time. This would work for spherical light field video, and then you could see that on the headset. We didn't want to go ahead and build this big complicated thing first off. I certainly didn't want to pull all the micro SD cards out of this thing to read them out. And so we decided that if we limit ourselves to still scenes, we can use a subset of the cameras and move them around in order to capture the light field stills. And so this is the device that we built. You can see it in the immersive pavilion. And it's based on a GoPro Odyssey, which was built with our Jump program from Daydream. It originally started as 16 GoPros tightly packed in a little circle to shoot omnidirectional stereo from the two fixed left and right eye viewpoints. But we stretched it out into a wider arc and then put it on a motorized rotation gantry that allows us to get all of those spherical points of view. And it's designed specifically so that we can take it places, take it with in our luggage in an airplane, and also set it up relatively quickly. So you don't actually need 4 people to do this, but you can see that in about 10 minutes you can get it out of the suitcase, set it up, and be shooting a glorious light field at that point. If you take a long exposure of what that rig looks like when it's going around, the power indicators of the GoPros, if you don't turn those off, actually kind of trace out the shape of what's being captured there, so you can see the sphere of viewpoints occurring. And then the visualization on the right side of the slide is showing basically how light field rendering works. We're capturing images on the periphery of the sphere, which record these rays of light coming in. But when the person's in VR, we need to render views that are inside the sphere, and we never really put cameras inside the sphere. So we're going to use the rays of light captured by those cameras that went on the outside of the sphere to compose new images based on pieces of those different images to show what you would actually see in your headset in VR. So you can see, for example, on the orange image there, those rays of light can produce one viewpoint, and then you'll reuse different pixels from some of the same images to produce another viewpoint from another perspective. Because all the rays of light you need for an image inside the sphere at some point had to cross the periphery, and we put a camera close to it. If one of those rays of light that you need actually went between 2 of those cameras, we use view interpolation techniques based on depth maps that Ryan will talk about later in order to produce that. So this is the rig actually in operation inside Space Shuttle Discovery. We did take into consideration the distance between the pilot and commander seats when we built the rig, and that kind of dictated the headspace that we had for some of our earlier captures. That sped up a little bit. I think we were running it in around about a minute. And the nice thing about this rig is that it's just fast enough that you can take pictures of people if they're willing to stay still. So we actually after we had recorded some of their house, we asked Sherry and Gonzalo in Venice if they would be willing to pose for a couple of portraits out in their creation that they had of their front yard. And fortunately, they were happy to do that. We had the question, kind of as a photographer, where do we tell them to look? Like, where's the lens? There's lots of lenses, and they're moving. So the first thing that we asked them to do is just stare at the post in the middle of the thing. Which is a little bit hard because you've got stuff moving across your visual field. And the result is that when you're looking at the light field, you have these people in there that are just kind of staring into space, and you can kind of move into their field of view, into their gaze direction, and move out, which is a little bit odd. So we had an idea of another way to shoot the light field, where we actually asked them to watch that little piece of green tape that we had on that side and the other side and on the front. That indicated the center camera, and just follow that with their eyes, otherwise keeping their neck and their head still. And the result of that, you can see, this is literally the video feed off of the central camera of our arc. You can see they're kind of following it with their eyes. Right before, Gonzalo blinks right at the very end there, but he was pretty good. And the result then is that in the light field, every view shows them looking back at you. So as you move your head back and forth, they actually are paying attention to you. They are themselves kind of frozen in space with their architecture. You get some nice reflections on the window behind them. But this seemed like the better way to do portraiture. If we have more time to record a scene, then we thought it would be nice to use image quality that's a bit higher resolution and higher dynamic range than what we can do with just GoPro cameras. And so we also built a version of the rig that uses mirrorless cameras such as the Sony Alpha 6500. And again, we wanted to make this really easy to pack up, so we wanted to use the same drivetrain that just rotates the thing. But now since we have fewer cameras, we actually have to have those tilt up and down somehow. And the way that we did that without having an additional motor is we actually used an idea that came back from the very first light stage from 1991, which got a light source to move around to all the positions on the sphere in a spiral using a string that unwinds. And so we actually made on the top there a little spool that has a string that's wrapped around it, and as that single motor turns this around, the string slowly unwinds, and it produces a spiral like you can see in the light stage, and the equivalent spiral that you can see here. There's the string unwinding. And if we put like an LED on each one of the cameras to trace it out, you can see that it produces a relatively well-calibrated data set of different positions. You also notice that there's kind of a bright dot as it goes along. That's because we actually have a mode where you can tell it to dwell on a position. If there's less light and you want it to stop and you can take a longer exposure. It also gives us the ability to shoot high dynamic range. So here we are in the cargo bay of the space shuttle, and you can see it stops every so often, and it's actually shooting high dynamic range images with plus or minus 2 stops at every position. And that gives us the ability to have a higher dynamic range light field that we have more latitude in the tone mapping process in order to try to make it look its best in the virtual reality headset. So those are the 2 rigs that we were able to build and that produce the things you'll see in Welcome to Light Fields over in the Immersive Pavilion. And I'd like to turn it back to Ryan Overbeck to talk about how we process and eventually render these light field data sets. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. Right, yes, thank you. So after we collect the images with one of those camera rigs, and before we can render them, we have some processing to do. And so we wrote up a fully automated cloud-based pipeline to prepare these images for rendering. And so the first thing we have to do is calibrate the images, where we get the position, orientation, and lens information for every image, and this is a visualization of some of our results from that. And you can see at the top and the bottom there are holes, and that's because at the bottom, that's where the tripod is, so you can't get cameras down there. And at the top, we don't always wind the camera all the way up to the top to save a little time in the shoot, so we sometimes end up with a hole there too. So to cover those holes, we use offline view synthesis, where we interpolate the images close to the holes and add images to the light field in order to cover those holes. Now after that, you see the distribution of images is a little uneven. It gets denser kind of towards those holes and then a little sparser elsewhere. So we remove some of the images in these denser regions, and we end up with a really nice even distribution of images all over the sphere. And then we extract depth maps because we use the depth maps for our rendering algorithm, which I'll explain later. So we take a neighborhood of images around each light field image and use multi-view stereo to generate these depth maps. And then to make them efficient for rendering, we convert those into a triangle mesh. We first make a dense triangle mesh out of it, and then just use a mesh simplification to get it compact for storage and rendering. And then our light fields tend to have 1,000 to 2,000 images, which tends to be about 4 to 8 gigabytes uncompressed, so we need compression. And so we modified the VP9 video codec to give us our compression, and our modifications make it possible to load the light field in compressed form so that it doesn't take up too much memory and just decode the parts that we need when we need them. And we were actually able to get these changes into the upcoming AV1 codec, and so soon anybody can compress light fields using this method. And after compression, you end up with a file that's about 50 to 200 megabytes, which is pretty good for download. And this is with the highest quality settings turned on. So you end up with this nice compact light field file, and it's ready for rendering. And there are really 2 big challenges for the rendering. First and foremost is quality, because any visual artifacts really hurt immersion. And then, of course, second is speed. We need to render stereo views at 90 frames per second, which is really fast. That's 2 views. You only get about 11 milliseconds to render both of those views. Fortunately, we came up with a pretty good algorithm that handles both of these really well. And to describe that algorithm, I'm going to go back to the flight deck here. The frames of this video were all rendered with our system. And so our renderer is blending together hundreds of images in real time to generate each frame of this video. And this is what one of those images looks like. So we projection map the image onto one of the depth maps that we generated in the processing pipeline. And you'll see if you just look at this one image, it looks okay towards the middle, but then out towards the edge, it gets really stretched and doesn't look so good. And the reflections don't move. They're just plastered to the geometry. But if you look through just a little window like this little dish-shaped window, things look pretty good because the rays going through that window match closely to the rays that captured that picture. And then if you do that for every image in the light field, where you have all these little dish-shaped windows that look onto each texture map, depth map in the light field. So with this light field, there's about 1,000 of them, so that's 1,000 of these little windows. You get this, and then if you grow those disks so that they overlap and blend them together, you get this nice cohesive view of the scene. You get really high quality rendering without disturbing artifacts, and we can render these consistently at 90 hertz on VR-ready computers. So that's an overview of how we do the rendering. Please join us tomorrow. Daniel Erickson is going to give a talk over at the Unity booth, which goes into more detail about how we made a light field plugin in Unity and use that to make it easier to add audio and mix our light fields with photogrammetry and things like that. And then we've been busy working on the next step for light fields, and I'll give a sneak peek of that here. The biggest request we've had since we launched is, can I please get some more room to move around in? And so we stretched out the arm on our DSLR rig, and now you get a full meter to move around in, which makes a huge difference. It's way more comfortable to look at these newer light fields. And then we also get a lot of requests for movie quality synthetic scene rendering. So we rendered about 1,000 images in Maya. Each image takes hours to render, but then we feed those into our processing system, and we're able to view this scene in real time. And then, of course, light field video is really exciting. We've got some very early results here. We have this prototype rig that we built, and we've got some early results. We've still got a lot of work to make it fully immersive and to make it practical for delivery, but we've got a good start. So please download the app if you haven't already. It's really easy to find up on Google. And please come and visit us in the Immersive Pavilion to get a live demo. We have some of these more recent results that I just showed playing there. And then we have a paper that is now conditionally accepted that goes into way more detail on how we do everything, so keep an eye out for that. So of course, lots of people went into this work. Thank you everybody who's here and not for helping us out there. Thank you all for paying attention, and we're ready for questions, I think, if we have time.
Yes,
Yeah, great.
There is time for questions, and if you do have any, please come up to the mics in either of the aisles.
Hi, my name is Sila Lee. I'm from University of Maryland. My question is, what are some of the problems that you run into for video light fields? Because I feel like there's going to be tons of data coming in, and how you go around solving that problem.
Yeah, so compression is definitely one of the big issues that we're digging into. You're right, it's just a ton of data that we have to deal with. So we've got some early ideas on how to deal with this, but that's one of the things we're iterating on. The other is just getting quality. Like, you know, if you don't hit this quality bar on these things, it's really hard to feel immersed in them. And so we've got a lot of work to do to get the reconstruction algorithm to really hit that quality bar.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, what plans do you have, if any, to open up either the hardware or the rendering pipeline to creators, VR creators?
Right, so we don't have immediate plans for that yet. We're evaluating a lot of different directions we can take this. And that's one of them that we're looking into, but we haven't committed to anything just now. Like I said, we did put the compression algorithms into AV1, and the code's already in there, so you can see already how we compress and decompress light fields, but currently we don't have immediate plans to release the other stuff just yet.
Hi, is it possible to stitch together multiple light field captures?
You mean kind of composite them, like have multiple light fields and composite them together to make?
Meaning, like, could you capture a meter here and then move a meter over?
Oh, you could totally do that. I mean, that's pretty much what Lightro did when they created Hallelujah. There's definitely some work to do to composite them together, some work to get them to align well and all that stuff. Our current pipeline is really nice and automated, so we'd want to make sure we'd automate something like that, but it's definitely possible. Yeah.
I believe there's time for one more question.
Does the system require manual calibration every time before usage?
Yes, so we have to calibrate for every shot because the moving camera rig and the string mechanism makes it so that the camera positions aren't totally repeatable, so we do a full calibration for every shot.
What method are you using for calibration?
Right, we use code based on Visual SFM, which is an open source package, so you can look for that, and we use methods based on that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Calibration was going to be one of my main questions, so
Okay.
I think you answered that. And then in terms of then post alignment and so forth, you do it as part of your processing on the cloud then, or?
How do you mean post alignment?
Well, in terms of you've calibrated it,
Yep.
but in terms of getting the images exactly lined up and, you know,
Well,
or does the calibration give you enough information?
That's exactly what the calibration does. It lines them all up, and then so that we know exactly the position in space where those images were taken from, and then the depth maps help align the images and that make it smooth as you transition between them when you're looking at them.
And then, so the Unity plugin, that'll take the AV1 format? Or
So
is
the
that-
Unity plugin, yeah, we coded our light field viewer, and it just feeds directly to our viewer. So it's just an OpenGL stream. So it takes the light field in there, and then we use Unity to build the Chrome around the light field rendering.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's all the time we have for questions now. Sorry if there are any, maybe the presenters will be available afterwards, but let's thank our speakers one more time, Paul and Ryan. Okay, our next speaker is Johannes